Hello friends, thank you for joining us. Today we will be talking with the president of Amazing Discoveries Ministries, a ministry that has been preaching the present truth for more than 25 years on all continents, through satellite, social media, and internet. He is also a university professor, scientist, physiologist, and zoologist, and he has dedicated his life in clarifying the latest prophetic events. Let's talk with Dr. and Pastor Walter Veith.
Thank you, Dr. Veith, for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Let's start by talking about the new series you have presented on a camp meeting recently, called Conflict and Triumph. What is this series about?
Well, the new series has a historic beginning and it has an eschatological ending, in other words, pertaining to the end of time. The historical part is how all the truths that were gathered in the Reformation and in the post-Reformation period all occurred under persecution, whether they were post or whether they were during the Reformation. Every single truth that was uncovered from the Bible was persecuted, and how eventually all those truths were gathered on the North American continent because of this persecution. And then in the North American continent, in the USA in particular, they made a constitution that church and state should be separate to prevent the kinds of persecution that took place during those periods. And then, of course, if all these truths had been gathered, then they had to be collected so that there would be a final body of truth versus error. And God is calling people to truth. And so we discussed the organizations and the great awakenings that took place and how these truths were gathered into a final body of believers. And then this truth has to come into conflict with error. And the Bible talks about a system which it equates with Babylon, and it says that this system of religious conglomeration had fallen because it had committed sin, and sin by definition is the transgression of the law, and therefore the truth that had been gathered will come into conflict with the errors of the general religious systems in the world. Many of them reject Jesus Christ as the Messiah. They virtually all neglect the law of God as recorded in the Bible. And this great conflict at the end of time, how will it culminate? How will God's people be gathered? And what will the outcome be of all of these events? That's what the series is about.
We were involved in this camp meeting, and we could see that there are a lot of informations put together. How long did it take you to prepare the series?
Well, it takes months and years to put something like that together. It is an unbelievable amount of work to collate all the information, because you have a piece here and you have a piece there. You have to read the historic books, you have to read the encyclopedias. And very often you have to consult very old and moldy encyclopedias that will tell you exactly what happened. Modern ones seem to gloss over the historic periods. And you have to spend many days and many nights collating it. So it's like writing a book, but not just any kind of book. It's like writing a book, let's say, on science. You have to have so many cross-references. And people think, just comes like this. Doesn't. It takes a lot of work to put a series together, yes.
Well, we know that you are a very busy person, giving lectures all over the world. Where do you find time to research and update the informations that you present us?
I never really plan a series. I don't say, well, I want to now do this. I read. I'm an avid reader. I read huge amounts, and I've trained myself to read quite quickly. And as I read, there are certain issues which will pique my interest. And then I become involved in this issue. And then I read everything that pertains to it. And when I find a rather interesting aspect, I record it. So I just write it down in a file. And when I find something new, I add it to the file. And then the file grows over time. And in the end, I have this huge file with huge amount of information. And then I sit down and I try to systematically organize what I have discovered in my reading and the quotes, and I gather all the quotes together, and then a series grows from there. Yes.
Okay.
And often I work at night, because in the day there are so many distractions. So often I will try and go to bed, let's say quite early at 9 o'clock, and then get up at midnight and work through the night.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'll do that for months at an end to get a series done. Yeah.
What do you have to say about the latest acts of the Vatican?
The Vatican never sleeps. They are always planning. They plan events and circumstances and political and religious moves decades, centuries, even millennia in advance. But the Bible tells us exactly what the final events will be. So you have to look at the events and collate them and compare them to prophetic interpretations. And where are we moving towards? Well, the Bible tells us that this system that controlled the world in the Middle Ages, that same system will control the kingdoms at the end of time. So there must be political moves to get the kingdoms in line with its agenda. And this must be on a universal scale. And there must be religious moves on a universal scale to get everybody to accept the primacy of the papacy. And once the political and the religious issues are in harmony again with one another and with the Vatican, then she will again control events as she did in the Middle Ages. So you have to ask yourself, are there global events which are taking place? And the answer is yes. If you take the issue of climate change, is there an encyclical from Rome which says that climate change must be addressed universally? And the answer is yes, Laudato Si, which the Pope Francis wrote. Does it contain religious elements? Absolutely. It contains the Eucharist worship. It contains the Trinity. It contains Mariology. It contains what the saints wrote. It contains issues of worship and which day, Sunday, for example. It contains all those elements, and you have to ask yourself the question, what has the Eucharist got to do with climate change? You have to ask yourself, what has Mariology got to do with climate change? You have to ask yourself, what has Sunday keeping got to do with climate change? But all of those elements are in Laudato Si. Then you have to go and check out and see who's talking about Laudato Si. Who is saying that this agenda of the Vatican must be implemented on a worldwide scale? And then you find the religious systems, one after the other, as you go through them, endorsing what the Pope had said. And you will find, if you click on the Parliament of World Religions, which is a conglomerate of all the religions in the world, what are they saying? They're pushing the agenda. And then you go to the political arena and you ask yourself, well, what's the political world saying about this? And then you have the Paris Accord, and they all agreed, but some countries did not agree. The United States, for example, didn't want to go along with it. Is there any move in that direction? Then you get to the G20 summit and you find out what did they do about it. And you'll see that the role players, the religious role players, the economic role players, the sporting role players, they were all involved in that. Was there any definitive action thereafter? Yes, there was. So obviously the agenda is moving in that direction. Now, how are you going to implement it then on a worldwide scale? Well, you have to enforce these accords. And as the Vatican says, it has to be written in red letters. What does that mean? Well, if you take your Bible and you see what is written in red letters, then it's the words of Christ. So the words of the representative, so-called, of Christ are also written in red letters, politically speaking. So are they going to implement these things? Under what basis? And then you look at what the agenda of the Vatican is, and you check it out on vatican.va, what are they doing? And you will see that one of the buzzwords for our time is common good. And what is common good? Well, something that is common good for all humanity. Climate change issue is obviously for the common good, because everybody must be on board. Mm-hmm. And so you put those things together and you can see that they're very busy. Are they aligning the religious systems? Well, absolutely. Hasn't Pope Francis signed an accord with the imams that they will work together? Hasn't he, in the ecumenical movement, gathered all the religious role players under one roof? And the answer is yes. So are we progressing towards this final goal of the papal agenda? You have to be blind if you want to say it's not so. Of course it is so. Prophecy is being fulfilled before our very eyes. And people are ignoring the facts. If we just collate the information, we can see that there is tremendous progress in the papal agenda for world domination on every level.
Well, they have been very busy.
They have been very busy, yes.
Okay.